Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for Career Conversations. Today we're joined by Dr. Zach Pincus, who was one of our 2016 Beckman Young Investigators. So thank you for joining us today.
Delighted to be here.
And kind of like to kick these off with going all the way back to the beginning. Can you think about when you were maybe in elementary school, maybe middle school? Where was that first sort of spark about science and the thought that you would become a scientist?
Yeah, well, it's interesting for me. I'm sort of in the family business. My dad was also a bench biologist, and I grew up mostly in fairly rural Montana, where my dad was at the Rocky Mountain Labs, which is a
Oh,
satellite institute of the National Institutes of Health. And so, some of my early memories are, my dad would have to go feed cells. And so I'd come in with him and he'd give me a Falcon tube and some parafilm to try to seal the water in to keep me busy while he was,
how old were you?
I
No.
don't know, 7 or so maybe.
Oh, okay.
But it really always felt to me like this is what I'd wanted to do because I had such exposure to it early. And I think I was really lucky in that way to really see what bench science looks like from a young age and to have opportunities then to work in labs in high school and then through college.
So if that was sort of a key piece of your community, was that, a lot of your friends had parents working there too, or sort of what was that experience like?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of my friends were, had parents who were at the lab, and so that was just, it was part of the water in which I swam, and didn't maybe recognize at the time until that it was a very unique environment. That a number of my childhood friends are now bench biologists across the country.
Yeah. So did that continue when you got to college? Just
Yeah, yeah.
the
So in
passion.
college, I mean, I've obviously always been really drawn to biology, but I've also been drawn to computers. And so in college, I stuck with a biology major and worked
Mhm.
in a biology lab throughout. But I really took sort of as few biology courses as I was allowed, so that I could complete what amounted to most of a computer science minor. Um,
Mhm.
and so that sort of started my career in this sort of half biology, half computation path that it's really been on ever since.
Was that must have been a little bit unusual at the time? I
It,
mean,
it,
now
it,
that's
it
got to
was
be like everybody does that, right? But
right.
was anybody else doing that then?
It was just at the very beginning when it was becoming interesting and attractive, um, and I was really excited when I learned that there was in fact a whole graduate program that was about they called it biomedical informatics at the time. Now it's biological data science. We've
Mhm.
gone from French for data science back to English for data science. Um, and so I actually wound up taking some courses from professors in that program as an undergraduate. And that really cemented for me, that yes, you really can do both of these things at the same time and have an active presence at the bench and doing computational work.
So were you working in the lab then as an undergrad and
Yeah, so I was working in the lab and doing very classic sort of bench biology work. It wasn't
Mhm.
until I started my graduate studies where I really tried to find a place where I could do both.
Okay. So how did you find that place?
A lot of pavement pounding. Honestly, I spent a lot of time talking to mentors, asking for people that I should go talk to find an advisor who was doing, real serious bench biology, but also had projects that would have computational aspects. And in particular at the time, and I guess ever since, I've been really interested in microscopy. I just love instrumentation in general. And so finding a lab where there was a real strong focus on microscopy and where we could come up with projects that had computational image analysis as a core piece, but the biology was really motivated by the lab's biology. That was the perfect fit for me.
Do you have any thoughts or tips for, people who might be looking at that same kind of, like you said, you pound the pavement. Was it a lot of cold calls or did you get mentors to reach out on your behalf? How did you really go about doing that?
It was through mentors by and large. And
Mhm.
it's really hard to look at a website of professors' research and have any sense of, are these interesting people? Is this an interesting area? And so what I did was I asked my mentors, who's a great person to work for? I figure, if you're at all interested in science, you'll be interested in anyone's science. Anyone who's exciting and thoughtful and fun to work for is going to have aspects of their science that you're going to be excited by, regardless of exactly what the project is. So I really wanted to be led by the person, finding a good person to work for that would be a good training environment, that would be an exciting place to work with great peers. That was the thing that really motivated me rather than, no, I have to work on X, Y, or Z.
So where did you end up for grad school?
So I was in Julie Terio's lab at Stanford in the Beckman
Ah.
Center at Stanford up on I guess we were on the fourth floor. So I was in a biomedical informatics graduate program, and then working in a lab in the biochemistry department, studying motile fish cells.
Okay. So how did that research then carry you forward? Did you take that up to your postdoc as well, or?
So that's another good question, and that was another inflection point.
Mhm.
We'd really sort of exquisitely modeled the cytoskeleton in one cell. And I thought with the sort of, hubris of a newly minted PhD, they're like, okay, we've done one cell, why don't we
Let's
try to
do
go
them
to
all.
what's the next scale up? And so that's where I became interested in C. elegans, this millimeter long nematode worm, which has about 1,000 cells. And we know all of the cells' names, we know their developmental lineage. So it's a lot of the pieces are very well understood. And I was curious if then we could start to understand the organismal physiology, again, at a very quantitative level, using microscopes as the tool. So there was a bit of a through line, sort of quantitative biology, modeling and quantitative measurement driven by what you can do at the bench. Um, but again, I interviewed a lot of different in different places, different C. elegans labs. I also interviewed, a little bit up and down the scale. I talked to some fruit fly people and um, but I was very interested in this sort of developmental biology,
Mhm.
quantitative biology, and again, my real goal was also finding an exciting training environment with a dynamic mentor, rather than saying this is the project I absolutely have to pursue. I had some parameters that I was interested in, but I was really willing to negotiate a lot to find the sort of the right fit for me, and I think that's an important consideration.
Did you find using that approach, like when you got to a lab, you were able to bring a new idea in? Did you kind of bring in your interest into what they were already doing and meld that in rather than just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
doing the
I
work?
mean, I would obviously, and again, this was from talking to mentors, who's doing interesting science, who would be a great person to work for. And
Mhm.
then I would read up about their lab's work and I would come with some proposals, knowing that and you write a proposal or two in your, letter, the email that you write to the prospective mentor. And you should of course know that the proposal is just there to say, look, I know a
I'm
little bit about
smart.
what you're doing. I've paid attention to what you've published, but then you get there and part of the interview process is really learning what everyone is doing in the lab. What are the active, cool areas in the lab? And then it's, ideally a really fun discussion back and forth about like, okay, I've seen that your lab is doing this. What if we did X, Y, or Z? And that's where you really get a sense of whether it's going to be a good training fit.
Mhm. And so you started an independent lab. Was that just sort of the next logical step?
Yeah, yeah. So that's actually where we get into some really interesting questions, right? Like I said, I grew up in bench science and academic science. My dad was at the Rocky Mountain Lab, and then he moved to Montana State University and was, the chair of microbiology. So we moved to Bozeman, Montana, where I am, where I'm back home today. Um, and so, at every step, it was just I sort of followed the next default step on the ladder. And it was what I wanted. And so I finished my postdoc and I was like, well, now it's time to get a junior faculty position. And I did. And it was, I was very privileged to have found
Yeah.
a wonderful position in between two very supportive departments at the medical school at Washington University in St. Louis. Um, but at no point did I ever really seriously consider doing something else because that just seemed like, the right path for me. And so then when I sort of walked into the lab for the first time, having been handed the car keys, so to speak, to mix metaphors, I felt like the dog that had caught the car. I was like, whoa, wait, now what do I do with this thing? Um, and so, I was there for a number of years. I was lucky enough to receive the Beckman Young Investigator Award, to learn how to navigate the NIH system. So that the lab was funded. We had um, research going on. I trained a number of really sharp PhD students. It was that was just a real highlight of the time. Um, but I also began to feel uh, that unlike some of my colleagues who seemed perfectly fine, juggling six or seven different balls, that 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 it was making me a little bit stressed out to have to keep that many
Yeah.
balls in the air all at once. And not to, I loved the teaching. I loved running the lab. I even loved the grant writing because like when do you get an opportunity to really sit down for a week and think just seriously about what should we be doing? What are the important questions to ask? Why is this justifiable? Why is this the best thing that, I could be doing or the best thing that the government could be doing to fund science in general? And so it's actually a really nice opportunity if you don't sort of allow it to just become a hideous stressor because you
Yeah.
wait too
A
long, which I
chore.
did
Yeah.
always. Um, but and I think it's sort of a pandemic cliche at this point, right? Where, the labs shut down. I was at home with two youngish kids. My wife is a pediatrician, so she needed to keep going into work. And so I had a little bit of space and a little bit of time to think about, like, wait a second, I did just kind of
Yeah.
take this default trajectory from, age 7 straight into an assistant professorship. And on paper everything looked great, but and again, I don't think it was the job. I think it was me. I like better being able to focus on one thing deeply for big chunks of time. Um,
Mhm.
and when I found that that was just not something that was going to be really possible.
Yeah.
Um,
Hard to calendar that.
right.
No meetings
Um,
this week. Sorry about that.
And there are
Yeah.
some professors who actually manage to do that.
Yeah.
And good for them. I couldn't quite
Cool.
figure that out myself, especially as junior faculty. I think once you're a little further along in the ranks, um,
Manage
yeah,
yourself. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but at the time, I had some friends from graduate school um, who had a biotech startup, and they'd asked me, a few times over the years, "Hey, do you want to come back out to California and join this startup?" And finally, I was, and it was the sort of Zoom revolution. I was like, "Wait a second, what if I don't come to California? Can I still join your startup? Can I move back home to Montana?" While my kids and my parents are both young enough to get a lot out of that that
Hmm.
interaction. And they said yes, to their credit. They said, absolutely, we can put someone, we can have a remote data science person. We need to fill that role. So I joined a data science team as an individual contributor, which felt like a real breath of fresh air coming from being a faculty, because now all of a sudden I had time to really devote to saying, okay, what can I do for the company to make a
Yeah.
difference? And honestly, there was something clarifying about being in the private sector, because you have a certain amount of time and a certain amount of money, and you actually need to turn that into a viable
Yeah.
product.
Gonna ask how your startup's going.
Ex-
Yeah.
um,
A lot of accountability.
yeah. But it's very clarifying. Well, should I do this or this? Well, what what is actually going to move us forward towards making new medicines? And so that was
Hmm.
fun. Um,
How do you think your transition was seen by some of your colleagues from school?
There
If
was a
that's not too
range.
personal a question,
No, no, no,
you
it's a
can
great
pass on that
question.
if you want. Yeah.
I mean, well, the first thing I can say is, I went back a few times afterwards for various graduations, which was
Mhm.
nice to be able to, finally confer PhDs and put the hood on some of my students. And the colleagues would say, well, do you have any regrets?
Yeah.
A year out, 2 years out, is this the was this the right choice for you? And I say, absolutely. I have no regrets.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's not to jump in, but I think that's a message people can hear though, too, right? Like,
yeah,
no,
absolutely.
no, industry's not bad. It's okay.
No, no. And when I told my colleagues, there was a range of responses, some of which were like, "Amazing, you escaped." So we'll be sorry to lose you. But
Yeah.
so there was a lot less, like, oh, industry, how dare you? There was none of that. Everyone was very supportive and understood absolutely where I was coming from. And the people who were happy in their labs, who want to stay in labs for the rest of their careers, were just as supportive as people who are also thinking about career transitions. So I think there's definitely this sort of feeling that especially some students have, like, oh, I can't tell my professor I'm interested in industry, and that was just not my experience at all.
Mhm.
There was a lot of support.
That's awesome. I feel like the winds are changing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and your journey and some of your advice. Do you have anything you'd like to say, kind of closing out?
Um, I mean, I think one thing, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture of industry either. It's
Mhm.
no panacea. In academia, you have sort of stability and longer horizons. Even today, the sort of stability that academia can offer, even grant-funded academia can offer, is just different than what industry provides. That projects get spun up and spun down quickly. Companies exist and then don't exist quickly.
Yeah.
And so, you're signing up for a different sort of life than sort of the slower paced, more methodical blue sky research that academia provides. So I don't want to make it seem like there's no reason for anyone to want to have an academic position. It happened for me that I wound up liking the focus and clarity of the industry positions a little bit better, despite the the more variegated career trajectory that you sign up for with that.
Great. That's really helpful advice. So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate your time today.
Delighted to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you.